The silence of a life. When Gregory Martin died, the town didn't mourn. It merely murmured. The obituary in the newspaper was brief, almost impersonal. Gregory T. Martin, 68, retired teacher, passed away last Monday. No children. Survived by a sister and 2 nephews. Private service at 3 p.m., Willow Gardens Chapel. That was it. Nothing more. No mention of the quiet man who spent his mornings tending the garden with a cup of tea. No memory of the decades he spent teaching. No hint of who he truly was, beyond the socially acceptable shell he left behind. Gregory lived his whole life like a polite shadow. He never married, never brought anyone to Christmas dinner, never spoke about love, and eventually, the family stopped asking. The funeral was cold, almost mechanical. The chapel, decorated with white lilies and a wooden crucifix, was silent. Few people came. A couple of retired colleagues, 2 neighbors, and his younger sister, Catherine, accompanied by her teenage children. She wept in silence, but not from grief. Rather, from guilt. The kind of guilt that blooms when you realize, too late, that you never really knew someone who was there all along. Greg was always discreet, she told an elderly woman who asked if he'd left an inheritance. Discreet. The word the family always used when referring to that part of his life they didn't know, or didn't want, to understand. Atop the closed casket, just a single old photo. Gregory, young, surrounded by his students, smiling. But with his shoulders pulled in, as if even in that photograph, he tried to take up as little space as possible. Catherine had arranged everything as respectfully as she could: a hymn, a Bible reading, a prayer delivered by the pastor from a church Gregory barely attended, a funeral like so many others, until he walked in. The chapel door opened slowly. A tall man in a dark gray suit, black hair streaked with silver, walked to the back of the room. No one recognized him. Not a single glance acknowledged his presence. Yet something about him hushed even the whispers. He held a red rose and an envelope, and walked with the certainty of someone who didn't ask for permission, because he didn't need to. His eyes were red, as if he'd been crying for hours, but his face was calm. He stopped before the casket, looked at the photo, closed his eyes for a moment, and then, in a low but steady voice, he said, "You knew him as Gregory. I knew him as Gray." A chill swept through the room. People looked at each other. Catherine stood, confused, trying to maintain composure as the ground shifted beneath her. "I'm sorry." "And you are?" she asked politely, though her tone was tight. The man gave a faint smile. "I was the only person he ever truly loved." Silence. Utter, uncomfortable, almost violent. The nephews stared wide-eyed at their mother. One of the neighbors gripped her rosary tighter. The pastor furrowed his brow. "Gregory and I were together for 12 years. He could never tell anyone, and it killed him more slowly than any disease." He didn't raise his voice. There was no anger, just truth. The man then opened the envelope. It was a letter, handwritten. The handwriting, graceful. Gregory's. "He asked me to read this, in case his family decided to bury him like a stranger. So here I am. Not to cause pain, but to stop the lie from continuing, even after death." And before Catherine could say a word, the letter that changed everything. The room remains silent. The man holds the paper firmly. His breath trembles at first, but his voice is clear. He knows that every word carries the weight of an entire life left unlived. He begins to read. "If This letter is being read. It's because my body has already been laid to rest, and perhaps, with it, some truths are being buried as well. I write this to stop that, to make sure they don't erase who I was. Catherine brings a hand to her mouth. The pastor, uneasy, fidgets with the pulpit. The neighbors watch as if witnessing something forbidden, but the man continues. I spent my whole life trying to be what people expected of me, the exemplary son, the respectable teacher, the quiet citizen, but never whole. For 68 years, I used my politeness as armor, my routine as a disguise, and my silence as a shield. But inside me, there was a voice that never stopped whispering, "You're still here. You still feel. You still love." The man pauses, takes a breath, and continues. I knew love, and it had a name. If you're reading this now, it's because my biggest fear came true. I died never having been seen for who I really was. We loved in silence, behind closed curtains, on quiet trips and birthdays celebrated behind locked doors. We lived in hiding, but the love was real. Catherine shakes her head, as if trying to wake from a strange dream. But this isn't a dream. It's a revelation. I am proud to have loved, and I regret never saying it out loud to you. Outside, the rain begins to fall. Inside, no one moves. The man lifts the letter, his hands now slightly trembling. I write this because I don't want to be remembered as an empty life. Because I wasn't. I had a partner who cared for me when I got sick, who held my hand on the nights when the fear of judgment nearly killed me from the inside, who called me Gray, because that was the name I used when I felt free. And, yes, we loved each other, gently, deeply, with a faith no church ever taught me. Gregory's words fill the room like a whisper too loud to ignore. Some avert their gaze, others, a few, begin to truly listen. The man reads the final lines. I don't write this to confront, but to free. If I stayed silent in life, let my death open doors. May no one else ever have to love in hiding. May no one else die as a mystery to their own family. And if anyone here wants to know who I really was, ask him. He knew me completely. He saw me when no one else wanted to. The man folds the letter. His eyes shimmer with tears. But he doesn't cry, he simply places the paper gently atop the closed casket. You didn't die in the closet, Gray. Not with me here. Then he turns to the room. Now you know. Anyone who still wants to pretend, go ahead. But the truth has been spoken. He walks toward the exit, each step steady. But before leaving, he looks back one last time at Catherine. She says nothing, but her eyes are full of shock, of memories that perhaps now are beginning to be rebuilt. The rain intensifies. The man steps outside, and out there, the world keeps spinning. But inside that chapel, nothing is as it was before. The silences of the family. The chapel door closed with a soft creak. The man was gone, but what he left behind remained. In the room, no one knew what to do with a truth still echoing in the air, like a song that ends abruptly but keeps playing inside your head. Gregory wasn't just discreet. He had loved. He had been loved. He had lived, and no one there knew it. Catherine remained seated, unmoving, staring at the envelope on the casket. It was as if she were facing a puzzle that shattered everything she thought she knew about. Her brother, her children whispered beside her. "Do you think it was true?" Of course. Who would make up a letter like that? But why did he never tell us anything? Catherine closed her eyes. She remembered Gregory on Sundays, always turning down family lunch invitations, always with soft excuses. I have an article to finish. I'm visiting a former student. I just need to rest. Now, every absence made sense. Every "I can't" was a form of protection. She stood slowly and walked to the casket. The photo, that old portrait with the hidden smile, now seemed to mock her ignorance. How many times had she used the word weird without thinking? How many times had she heard someone say, "Gregory's a bit strange," and silently agreed? She felt the weight of silence, not Gregory's silence, hers, and everyone else's. The pastor cleared his throat, tried to regain control. Let us pray that God may comfort our hearts, even in the face of unexpected revelations. But the words rang hollow, like a sermon that no longer fit. One of the neighbors stood up, said he had to leave, and slowly others followed, each one with their own version of grief, each one struggling to process what had just been revealed. Catherine was the last to remain. She sat in the front pew, and for the first time in years, she cried for Gregory, truly cried. Not because he had died, but because she had never allowed him to truly live near her. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she murmured, looking at the casket. But the answer, she already knew. That night, back home, Catherine pulled from her closet a box her brother had left with her years ago. "If I'm ever gone, this is yours," he had said. "But only if you really want to know me." She had never had the courage to open it, until now. Inside the box, she found letters, Polaroids, postcards, a necklace, and a small wooden sculpture. Photos of the two of them, Gregory and the man from the funeral, on beaches, in parks, at quiet dinners, hugging, happy, normal. And there, for the first time, Catherine met the whole Gregory, not the restrained brother, but the man who had loved deeply and with fear, who laughed freely in places far from his family's eyes, who existed fully, even if only in secret. She spent hours reading the letters. Some were declarations, others memories of trips, some were sorrowful. One in particular made her stop. "Last night I dreamed I was having dinner with Kat, and you were by my side." She knew, and she smiled. One day? Maybe. She cried. For the missed chance. For the lack of courage. For the bond that had never been. The next day, Catherine returned to the chapel. Alone. She brought a flower, but not a white one. She brought a red rose, like the one the man had left. She placed it gently on the casket, and whispered, "Now, I see you, Greg. And even if it's late, I love you completely." Who was Gray? The man returned a week later, not to confront, not to cause a scene. He came back because he wanted, perhaps needed, to return to that space with a portrait no one there had ever seen. He was received with suspicion. But this time, Catherine was waiting. She had read every letter, touched every photo, felt the absence like someone who had only just realized the size of the hole Gregory had left behind. She invited him into her home. They sat on the porch with 2 cups of tea, just like Gregory used to do. The sky was clear, but the air between them still felt heavy. She spoke first. "I'm sorry I didn't recognize you, or him." He smiled, his eyes sorrowful. "You don't have to apologize for something you were never allowed to see." Catherine nodded. She knew. She knew that even though Gregory had been present, he was never truly permitted to be seen. Man began to share. He said his name was Andrew, an architect. son of an evangelical mother and a military father. He also knew the weight of hiding. He and Gregory had met by chance, at an art exhibit in a neighboring town. They pretended not to notice each other, then exchanged glances, and finally shared a bench in the nearby square, where they talked for 2 hours without realizing time had passed. They were together for 12 years. They didn't officially live together, but they spoke every night, and spent at least 2 days a week side by side. They traveled in secret, celebrated birthdays in distant hotels, exchanged letters instead of texts. They had codes, disguises, ways of loving away from the eyes that would judge. "He called me home," Andrew said, "because with me, he could take off his shoes, his fears, his mask, and just be." Catherine listened in silence. Each word was a new mental photograph of Gregory she had never imagined. "Did he laugh out loud?" she asked, almost surprised. Andrew chuckled. "A lot. With that laugh that sounds like a hiccup, you know? When he felt safe." She smiled, but her eyes shimmered with tears. "I never heard that laugh." Andrew showed her photos. Gregory wearing a kitchen apron, making pancakes. Gregory smiling next to a painting he'd made but never showed anyone. Gregory singing karaoke at a gay bar in New Orleans, far from town, far from guilt. He had a beautiful voice, but he only sang with me. The first time I heard it, I cried. He never believed he was good. Catherine held the photos as if they were fragments of her brother she was only now rediscovering. Too late. Andrew reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pendant. It was a hand-carved wooden piece, 2 intertwined leaves. He made this during a weekend we spent at a cabin. He said it was us. 2 parts that grew in different directions, but touched in the middle. He wanted you to have it someday. Catherine held the pendant gently, as if it were something sacred. And maybe it was. The conversation lasted for hours. They laughed, they cried, and together they rebuilt the emotional biography of Gregory, or rather, of Gray. He was so much more than discreet, Catherine. He was whole. He just was never allowed to show it here. She nodded. "I know. Now I know." When it was time to say goodbye, Catherine hugged him. Truly. Without shame. Without reservation. "If you ever want to come back, this house is yours too." Andrew smiled. He said nothing. But his eyes, for the first time in days, were shining with peace. When the town fell silent. On the outside, nothing had changed. The bakery opened at 7, like always. Masses continued at their usual times. The gossiping ladies still swept their sidewalks in the early morning, eyes on the ground, ears wide open. But inside, the town was different. Something had been broken, or rather, exposed. The story spread faster than rain on an old tin roof. Did you hear what happened at Gregory's funeral? A man showed up saying he was, well, his partner. And there was a letter, written by Gregory himself. Word partner became a whisper between clenched teeth. The word love was carefully avoided. They preferred neutral terms, close friendship, peculiar relationship, big city kind of thing. But the damage, if that's what you could call it, had already been done. In conversation circles, there were 2 kinds of silence. The silence of those pretending nothing had happened, and the silence of those who had been struck deep in the heart. Those who grew up hearing Gregory was strange. The young ones who never understood why he seemed too kind, too quiet, too alone. And suddenly, it made sense. He was like me. He lived the way I live. He silenced the same voice I silence every day. At the following, Sunday Mass, the priest did not mention Gregory. Not in prayer, not in the sermon. But the pulpit felt heavier. As if the altar itself was ashamed for having ignored the son who died sitting quietly in the back pews. One woman left in the middle of the homily. She had been Gregory's student decades ago. Later she said, "He taught me to read with patience, and I never asked why he always left so quickly after class." At the school where Gregory had taught for 30 years, they placed a small photo frame in his memory. Before, it had only his birth and death dates. Now, a discreet addition. Fought for knowledge, lived with integrity, was loved. It was enough to spark debate among the teachers. Should we really go there? What if the parents complain? But it's the truth, isn't it? Catherine, meanwhile, became the center of town whispers for other reasons. Some said she shouldn't have let that man read the letter. Others thought it was beautiful that she welcomed him afterward. But she didn't respond. Not to defend, not to explain. She simply walked through the town with more certainty now, as if by acknowledging who her brother truly was, she had also rediscovered a part of herself. Then, the notes began to arrive, from people who had never spoken up. "My brother also died alone. I'm afraid I'll be buried without anyone knowing who I am. Thank you for letting him be remembered as whole." A teenager left an anonymous note on her front gate. "He was the only teacher who never made me feel wrong. And Andrew? He returned to his life. But with a new purpose now. He began writing a book about Gregory, about their years together, about what it means to love someone who is afraid to exist beyond closed doors. It's a book he could never write, but one I have to finish, for both of us." Life in the town moved on, as towns always do, but there was something different in the air, a quiet unease, like when an old secret is finally spoken aloud, and the dust takes time to settle. Gregory's name, once forgotten, was now remembered with care, even in whispers, even in awkward glances, even in prayers that still didn't know how to name the love between two men, because now, no one could say they didn't know. The truth was never buried. Gregory Martin's grave is simple, a gray headstone, birth date, date of passing, a verse chosen by Catherine, now carrying a different meaning, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." John 8:32. She didn't choose it out of irony. She chose it out of justice. The grave is always adorned with fresh flowers now. Sometimes a red rose left by Andrew. Sometimes a colorful bouquet from a former student. Sometimes a folded note with words like, "Thank you for existing. I'm sorry it was so hard. You gave me courage." Gregory was loved in silence. Now he is remembered aloud. Andrew's book was published the following year, a simple title. A cover with a photograph of two hands gently intertwined. The name, Gray, the story he couldn't tell. The launch was held at the library of the school where Gregory had taught. Many teachers didn't attend. Others came quietly, but the room was full, with young people, with elders, with those who knew exactly what it was like to live without being able to name themselves. Andrew didn't say much, but when he stepped up to the microphone, he said, "Gregory spent his life waiting for the chance to be seen. But now, he's not the one who needs that anymore. We do. We need to learn to see the people beside us, before it's too late." Applause, long and sincere. Catherine started a project in her brother's name. A scholarship fund for LGBTQIA+ youth in vulnerable situations. She called it the Gray Project. So no one else has to live in the shadows to be accepted. And Every time someone asked why she, a church-going lady, why decided to do such a thing, she answered with just 3 words: because I failed. And now, she didn't want to fail again. But Gregory's greatest legacy wasn't in pages. It was in the conversations now happening between parents and children, in the silences broken over dinner tables, in the young people choosing not to hide anymore, in pastors revisiting their sermons, in teachers paying closer attention to the quiet ones, and all of it because of a letter, because of a love that refused to be forgotten. 1 year after Gregory's death, Catherine returned to the chapel. She brought a candle, sat in the same front pew she had during the funeral, and looked toward the altar. There was no service, no pastor, no one else, just her, and the memory of her brother. You didn't die a mystery, Greg. You live now. As a symbol. And for anyone who still doubted the truth, she simply said, if it was a lie, why did it touch so many? This isn't a story about death. It's about the lives so many never got to live, about the loves never displayed in picture frames, about the names never spoken around the dinner table, and about the courage that sometimes only arrives after someone is gone, but still, it arrives.